So we're on to our third model now. And unlike the previous model, the social constructionist model, which was at this big kind of large group level of viewing communication, we're back to a more one-on-one or the activity that's between individuals, like the psychological model. But unlike the psychological model, the pragmatic model is just not really that interested in meanings and understanding and the mental activity of trying to understand the meaning of something. And instead, what the pragmatic model is going to focus in on is how people use communication to act, to do certain things, to achieve certain goals. And a good way of thinking about this is the chess board that you see here. If we were to try to describe what's going on in a chess game, one of the easiest ways we might do that, or clearest ways we might do that, would be to focus in on the sequence of actions that are being taken by the players, right? Player one moves this piece here, player two responds by moving this piece here. We're not really concerned at all what's going on in the mind of the players. We're just going to focus in on trying to describe what they're doing. And this is similar with how pragmatic scholars view communication. We're interested in what the communicators are doing with their communication in order to coordinate their behavior and achieve their goals. So the pragmatic model sees communication as a kind of back and forth turn-taking between individuals as they interact in order to get things done and achieve their goals. The basic kind of parts of a pragmatic model are an action that's taken. I ask a question, right? Followed by a reaction, which creates an interaction, right? I ask a question, you give me an answer. And depending upon whether or not I'm satisfied with the outcome of that interaction, whether there's a payoff, oh, I got the answer I was looking for, or a punishment, you scold me rather than answer me, then there'll be some sort of pattern of communication that gets established. And so a pragmatic scholar is going to be focused on trying to focus in on what are the patterns of communicative activity that's being done. Here's an example of a pragmatic model of communication called a positive feedback loop, or a reinforcing feedback loop, right? And here's an example of that in action. I yell at you, and then you yell at me back even louder, and then I call you names, and then you hit me, right? So we're kind of reinforcing this aggressive activity in a reinforcing positive feedback loop. It could be communication that's not necessarily something that's bad. For example, I could give you a compliment, and then you could compliment me back, and then I could take you to dinner, and then on and on and on, right? So you get that kind of pragmatic model of a reinforcing feedback loop. What we're emphasizing here is that it's not necessarily what the compliment was that I gave you. Maybe I said your hair looks nice. Maybe I said I like your clothes. That's not really so much is important to a pragmatic perspective as is just making the compliment itself. What kind of action are you taking? I'm giving a compliment. Similar to a positive feedback loop, we might look at a negative feedback loop. And a negative feedback loop is diminishing. I take an action and then you diminish it. And then I try to take the action again. I give you a compliment, you ignore me, right? So a negative feedback loop, and it kind of diminishes the communication there. So these are just examples. You don't really need to know these particular models. The important thing is that we're focusing on modeling communication in a way that emphasizes the actions that people are taking, not the meanings that they're sharing. So it's significantly different than our other views. The pragmatic model focuses on what actions people take with their communication. What are they doing, right? Asking a question, interrupting, right, is a kind of action. It doesn't matter why you're interrupting. You're interrupting somebody. That's an action that's going to get a certain reaction back. It can help us, this view, this model, try to break unhealthy patterns of interaction that we might have. Every time I go to speak to my partner about something that I'd like them to change, they don't listen to me. Well, if we look at how you're doing it, maybe you're insulting them with your communication as your way of trying to confront the thing you want them to change. And so you're beginning the communication with an insult. They're reacting by showing their dismay, right? So we can use the pragmatic model to try to take out some of the personalities, some of the issues that are sticky, and just focus in on what are you doing with your communication? How are you two going about communicating with one another? Here's an example of scholarship that might be from the pragmatic perspective. How do communicators accomplish and maintain a difficult conversation? So what are the actions that I can do to maybe fire my employees without upsetting them, right? So what can I do to make this a successful conversation? Maybe I could start by expressing how much this person is valued by me. And then I might want to explain why there are circumstances beyond my control, right? And if I take these certain actions with my communication, then I'll get certain reactions back. Scholars who are using a pragmatic perspective are taking what's called the systems approach, where they're trying to kind of holistically describe what's going on in any instance of communication. They're going to look at it systematically rather than focusing on a particular individual. We're going to try to look at it whole and see what's going on at a systems level. Again, we're going to talk more about these ideas of a rules approach, a laws approach, and a systems approach when we get to chapter 8 later on. Just know now that a pragmatic model is trying to treat communication at a holistic level. Here's some criticisms of the pragmatic perspective. For one, it's going to just view personality as kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. We don't care about it. We're not going to look at it. Same thing with culture. We're not really interested in the culture of the people who are participating in the conversation and the context in which that conversation is occurring. We're just interested in kind of what are the moves that they're taking. And it's going to ignore the role of power in the relationship. There's one person coercing and exercising power over the other, or how does the relationship reinforce certain power relations that are problematic within society? It doesn't really take into consideration the role of power in society at all. It's just looking at how do people coordinate their actions. So that is the pragmatic model and perspective on communication. In the next video, we'll talk about the final way of looking at communication, a critical view of communication.